Hi, today in this video we are going to talk about how to remove a fender from a VW MK1, Scirocco, Rabbit, Golf, Polo, etc. This is going to apply to a lot of different VW models. The first thing you're going to want to do is start by removing anything that is in your way from doing this work. Things like bumpers, corner lights, side markers, or anything else that you don't want damaged, you should remove from the car. The car that I'm going to be using today is a parts car that I'm stripping down, so I've taken off a lot of different things that you may not need to take off, but again, the goal here is that you need to get everything out of the way so that you can access screws, nuts, bolts, panels to start this work. Let's start by talking about the different tools that you're going to need to perform this job. From left to right, you've got a heat gun. I prefer a heat gun over a blowtorch because it's not an open flame, and this worked really great for this job. You're definitely going to need a utility knife with several sharp blades. You're going to want to have a 5-in-1 tool. You're going to need that absolutely for the top part of the fender. You're going to want to have some picks, so this way you can pick away and get into some of the crevices and to run along a lot of the seams to move some of the sealant out of the seams. I used a very small chisel, not to hammer against, but to help move away some of the sealant. I used a needle nose pliers to be able to pull away at some of the places, and you're definitely going to need a 10mm socket and a 13mm socket to remove the bolts and along the fender line and some other parts, period. You might also need a Phillips head screwdriver to remove some parts out of the way. The first thing that you need to do is to put the car up on jack stands and take off the tires. In this case, I'm taking off both fenders, so I've taken off both front tires and I have the whole front end up on jack stands. After you have removed all of the things that you want to get out of the way, the first thing you need to do is remove all of the bolts. Period. On a Scirocco, there is 10 of them. On Rabbits, I think there might be 9 or 8, but regardless, you got to find all of the bolts and remove them all. We'll start by removing the bolts along the top end of the fender, which is along the hood line. Next, you're going to remove the 2 front bolts. There's going to be one on the front face and one that's on the underside of the fender, also in the front. Next, you remove the bolt that is on the underside of the fender, close to the front of the door. Next, we move inside the wheel well, where you're going to find 3 bolts that we have to remove. Some may be hard to find because they are covered under the sealant that was applied. So you're going to have to use your knife and utility to remove the sealant until you can get a socket on them. There's going to be one high up on the fender. It's going to be hard to get to, but you got to get off all 3 bolts. Next, you're going to use your heat gun and the 5-in-1 tool to run under the top lip of the fender. There shouldn't be a lot of sealant here. If there is, mine was pretty easy to get the knife under, and I just run the utility tool from front to back all the way until I can get that utility tool underneath the entire lip of the fender. Now here's where the fun begins. Be patient and take your time. It's going to take a while. The first thing you need to do is find the seam along the fender, and I'm going to point to it here. You'll see it. Make sure you have good light, because that's where you're going to start your work. We're going to start on the lower section of the panel, and you're going to use the heat gun. Even though I'm showing you a heat gun now with me working at the top, I'm just showing you an example of how I use it. I go back and forth with the heat gun in a small area, and then I start working with the knife to cut through along the seam. You're going to use the knife to cut through all of the sealant. Make sure you have a sharp blade, and you may need to change your blade a couple times for a fender. what you're cutting doesn't need to be wide, it just needs to cut through all of the sealant all along the seam. And we're going to continue to do this process all along the seam, starting at the bottom and working our way to the top. You're going to keep alternating with the knife, and you're going to be putting the heat gun on it, and you're just going to continue to work at it with the knife and the pick until you get a nice cut along the seam. And here I'm using the pick kind of inverted inside the seam to get some of the junk out from behind the seam so that it will break it open. It'll break open easier. So I've got the bottom section pretty good, and if I pull on this now, it's hard for me to do two-handed. You can see that it's starting to move a little bit. And I just use the pick to run up the inside of the seam to dig out as much of the seam sealer as possible. Once you get to the top, you're going to have to cut along the top edge as well to get the sealant free. And I'm going to put an arrow on the screen of along where you have to cut, but you got to keep going. So as I was working it up, I just got up to the seam here like this, along the seam, and I just started pulling, and then all of a sudden it came free. Now I got to go up top here and cut open some of that stuff, and then this thing, the back is going to be off. And I just use the pick up along this section, well, the knife and then the pick, and then I kind of use the pick to just pry under here a little bit, and then it came free. So now the back side is completely free. We got to go work on the front. Just so you can see a little video of where it separates. Okay. I pulled forward. Okay, now I'm being held on by the front. So we're gonna have to work on this front section. And I'll do the same thing with the pick and the float and the hot air gun. See, I've already picked out some of this area, but now I'm just going to beat it up and get some more out of there. Now we'll go work on the front section. Changed out the blade of my knife. It's cutting a little bit better. You can see I'm making some progress, and I've got a cut there, so you can see how that's working. All right, now I'm in the front and I'm using the heat gun and working my way around the seam here. All right, it's wiggling loose. I just got to get in here some more, but just got to keep working at it. I'm just using the knife to slice a path. The seam stuff goes all the way up, so you just got to keep working at it to release all of it, and eventually you'll just kind of get to wiggle it all out. Just keep hacking away until it all comes free. I finally got the bottom free by pulling down here, and now I'm just left with this top section. I just heated up the section and it finally broke free. So it's still being held on up top here a little bit. I just got to cut through that and then we're free. So just a quick warning, as you get closer to the end of getting a fender off, you don't want to pull too hard, you don't want to wiggle it too hard, you don't want to bend the fender if you're trying to keep it. So, you know, wiggle away, but don't do it to the point where you are bending up your fender if you're planning on reusing that fender someplace else. So I'm doing this after the fender is off, but you got to take this vacuum off. There's a little 13mm here, and then you'll see there's 1, 2, 3 screws, and you can see how much spooge it's held on with. Alright, I've got the fender off, but you can see just how much of this stuff is on here that you have to cut through and where you have to cut through. It's very thick depending upon who put it on. And here's the other side of the fender so you can see where you got to cut all the way up and around. And this part up here was very tough. Very tough to get to. And back here, you just got to find that seam and the back will come off easy. It's the front that's a real pain. And there you have it. It took me something like 3 hours per fender, and I haven't done this before. I just got some help and advice from other people, and just attacked it. But you can see how thick that sealant is, and it is tough to cut through. So make sure you have a bunch of blades, sharp blades, and just take your time. It's going to take a while, but you can do this.